How do you do, my fellow squishies? No, this is not a live stream for regular viewers, although that is how I start my live streams for non-regular viewers. Regardless, if you are interested at all, on the weeks that we do not do an episode here at the Sacred Cow Shipyards, we are typically found somewhere doing a live stream of some game or another. More often than not, that particular game is a now somewhat old one called Faster Than Light. And it occurred to me, as these things frequently do when I was cubifying a ship, that I hadn't actually talked about any of the FTL ships. I've played the game quite a lot, but it seems like we should have a discussion about the ships, right? Well, that's what we're going to do. Any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards. For those of y'all who do not know, Faster Than Light is a roguelike game developed and designed by J. Ma and Matthew Davis at Subset Games and released in 2012 by your calendar. Now, again, for those of y'all who do not know, and I may use that term a lot in this particular episode, roguelike refers to a specific style of game where it will save your progress, but you cannot access any old saves. In other words, you can exit the game at any time and re-enter the game at the exact same point that you exited, but you cannot just arbitrarily save the game, make a decision, decide you don't like that decision, and then go back and reload that old save. Now, technically, there are workarounds for this particular problem for FTL, but it does kind of defeat the point of the game. All of your choices are permanent. If one of your crew members dies, they die. If your ship explodes, you lose, and that's it. You get to start over again and try one more time. And there are piles of games like this because the genre is actually named after a game called Rogue that was released in 1980. And yeah, it was a permanent choice kind of game. And piles of games have developed out of this genre, and FTL is one of the examples thereof. In fact, the developers specifically cite a number of other roguelike games as to why they made their game the way it is. Specifically, the game Weird Worlds: Return to Infinite Space and the other game Spelunky. And the whole point of the genre, I would personally argue, and you're free to disagree in the comments as you like, is to make you more invested in the game. There's something a little, not cheaty, but different about a situation where you know if you save and you screw up, you can just go back to your save point and try again. With roguelike games, you're committed. Whatever you do, you are going to just do and live with the consequences, which makes the story a little more compelling in my opinion. And of course, by story, I actually mean the story that you develop by way of the game, because of course, as with almost all, possibly all roguelike games, you have choices, and your choices affect the outcome of the game. In fact, some choices very early on in FTL can affect whether or not you will even win the game. And you have no idea what those choices are or when they come up or what effect they will have downstream. You just got to kind of roll with it and see what happens. But anyways, we are not here to talk about the hypotheticals and motivations behind game design and why people make the games they do. Instead, we are here to talk about these ships like I talked about. So, where else to start except, naturally, the beginning? And the first place you start in FTL is the Kestrel. Apparently, kestrels on your planet are a subset of the genus of falcons, predatory birds, but in the game, it's basically leftover junk. The ship class was decommissioned years and years and years ago in the Federation, but they had to bring it out of mothballs and reuse it because everything was going to crap, and, well, you use what you got, right? It's technically a cruiser class, but technically all the ships you fly are cruisers, so that's kind of immaterial. But let's dig into the details here. To start with, the base model of the Kestrel, that is to say Layout A, is a human-designed ship crewed by humans. So it's somewhat naturally symmetrical. You've got an even balance of engines on both sides. You've got the cockpit way up in the nose. You've got the engineering way back in the stern. And yeah, it is a balanced design. As you would expect most humies to design their spacecraft because, Newtonian physics and all the rest of that nonsense. There are some interesting details, though. First off, the engineering space way back at the back of the ship, and yes, the little thing that looks like an engine pumping out a little flame in grayscale is the engineering space. And specifically, the rooms that have more gray icons in them are things that the ship comes with, whereas the grayed out icons, the grayed out gray icons, yes, are things that you can upgrade with the ship later on. We're going to focus on the built-in stuff and maybe expand into the upgrades. But regardless, the engine room way back at the stern actually has a double-door airlock out the stern of it. Kind of make a shocking degree of sense, right? I mean, if you want to bring in heavy equipment or fuel or whatever else you need on board the ship, you might as well have an airlock right there. And conveniently, the port and starboard airlocks are exactly that. They're airlocks. They have 2 external doors each and 1 internal door, which will help you contain atmosphere inside your ship when you're docking at stations and so on and so forth. Alternatively, that is more doors you have to open if you want to, say, put out a fire the easy way by venting it into space, or if you want to, say, vent borders into space as well, but it's just a few more clicks in the game and it's no big deal. Also, for whatever reason, despite the fact that there are 2 doors on the outside and 1 door on the inside, the atmosphere doesn't actually go out that quickly in the game. Once you open those doors, say if the mind control room, that grayed out gray swirl, is on fire, it will take it a good 10 seconds in the game to fully vent and for the fire to go out. I would argue that if those doors are, say, standard Humie house door sized, or probably a little bigger just to allow equipment to move through them, so forth and so on, if you opened all those doors directly to space, the Atmo would kind of go exit stage left pursued by a bear very quickly. But, the game has to impose certain mechanics, so I kind of understand the idea. Now, at the other end of the ship, from the engineering space, is the bridge, the cockpit, what have you. The space that has the kind of the 3 laying on his back kind of icon going on. Now, there are a lot of arguments to be had about bridge positions in ships, cockpit positions in ships, so on and so forth. I am naturally of the opinion that the bridge should be at the physical core of the ship in question, completely isolated from the exterior and relying on, unfortunately, exterior sensors to keep itself appraised of the situation. Mostly because, for most space situations, line of sight isn't really relevant. It's line of sensors. Your sensors will be able to detect, identify, and track things far before your eyes can even perceive them. That said, ships in FTL, all of the ships, whether we're talking about the cruisers here or anything else you will encounter in the game, only seem to have the 1 deck. So your bridge, wherever it is still up against the skin of the ship regardless. Likewise, when you're getting shot, the incoming weapons don't really have, a care where they're coming from. Let me try to explain that better. Generally speaking, the enemy is on the right and you are on the left. Your projectiles go from the left to the right. Their projectiles come from the right and go to the left. Fine. All makes sense. You would think, therefore, that those projectiles would hit, say, the bridge or the med bay or the shielding room first before hitting anything else on the ship. This is not really the case. Depending on how the random number generator falls out in your disfavor, basically every compartment on the ship is available to be shot at any given moment. It really doesn't matter where it actually is, so in this particular case, the placement of the bridge also kind of doesn't matter. Now, I understand that putting the bridge at the nose of the ship does make a lot of sense. After all, you want to see where you're going. But there are some other bridge placements that we might get to on other ships that also kind of sort of make sense. And I know that mixing the game mechanics with potential real-world mechanics doesn't make a whole lot of sense in this context, but we might do it regardless. Otherwise, the only really other interesting thing about this ship is that they centrally located the weapons station as opposed to the shield station. I can't really decide how I feel about that. The weapons on this ship are equally balanced port and starboard. You can see the missile launcher on the port side and the burst laser on the starboard side in this particular configuration. And then the weapons are right in front of the engineering room, basically, which makes routing power from the engines to the weapons quite easy, and also makes the lines from the weapon room to the weapons themselves pretty much symmetrical. On the other hand, if this were like a realistic style ship, I would kind of prefer having the shield generator centrally located instead, because yeah, I'd prefer keeping that energized and protected by the rest of the hull and ship as well. Now, speaking of the hull in this game, you do in fact have a shield generator, like we talked about, that little room with the big C enveloping the S kind of thing going on. And those shields can absorb damage, and they reload, recharge, however you want to phrase it, pretty quickly. Once your shields fail, your hull starts taking damage. All of your ships in this game, regardless of which one you're flying, have 30 hull hit points. Once those are exhausted, you explode. It doesn't matter where your ship gets hit. If that weapon does hull damage, you will take hull damage. Now, there is another mechanic in this game that does come up periodically. I already mentioned fires, and those are a real problem because they can spread and they can destroy the systems on the ship as well as kill your crew, both by, burning and by depleting oxygen in the space. But another way of depleting oxygen in the space is by taking a hull breach. And yes, that's exactly what it sounds like, a big gaping hole in your hull. Amusingly, this doesn't normally actually cause hull damage, but it does cause the atmosphere to vent, I would argue faster than opening the doors does, which, again, is an interesting game mechanic. Anyways, moving on. And by moving on, I naturally mean that we are moving on to layout Bravo B of the Kestrel. This one is called a red tail, which, again, is a reference to the hawks on your planet. The flavor text on this one indicates that it was created by a laser weapon aficionado, which appears to be true. The baseline version of it comes with 4 basic lasers already installed, and you only have 4 weapons emplacements on this ship to start with, and to end with. You only ever get 4. So you're already fully loaded with all the lasers. Yes, you heard that right. This is in fact the Nova, or Blackhawk, depending on which faction of Battletech or Mech Warrior you belong to, of the FTL universe. All the lasers! Amusingly, though, in the process of installing all the lasers, they decided apparently that airlocks are just totally meaningless. Not only does the engine room no longer have direct access to the outside by way of an airlock, well, actually, let me rephrase that. The engine room now has 2 airlocks, but the problem is the airlocks themselves are the shielding room and the weapons room. I have so many questions. And then, I suppose, if you don't have mind control, again, that little swirly thing, or hacking, the little computer terminal installed, those are just, airlocks by themselves, but once you install equipment into them, they are actually functional rooms. Now, I don't think mind control or hacking require a soft-font to actually man the stations. And yes, your crew does provide augments the longer they stay on certain stations. For example, the longer someone stays in the bridge, the better they are at dodging shots. The longer they stay in the weapons, I believe the more accurate their shots are, and the longer they stay in shields, perhaps the faster the shields come up. Regardless, your crew gets experience over time, but not all equipment stations on the ship require or need or even want a soft-font to actually control them. Like the O2 generator, the atmosphere generator, yeah, it doesn't care if there's a crew member in that room. The med bay does care just because it will fix anyone in the room, but it doesn't need to be manned for that to happen. Although, I guess the only way that someone gets fixed is if they are in the med bay, so maybe they're manning it while they're getting fixed? That seems very like Ouroboros-like. You only get healed if you run the med bay computer. It makes a certain degree of sense, I guess. The real hilarity, though, is the double-sided, quadruple-doored airlock immediately behind the bridge. Like, okay. I guess if we really want to evacuate that space, we could, but if the engine room and the bridge are not currently manned, the ship ain't making a jump. And you have to do FTL jumps, naturally, to get between systems and then sectors in the FTL game. So venting your bridge is not normally a good idea. On the other hand, if you need to vent, say, the door room or the battery room or the O2 generator or the cloaking device, that thing that looks like an eyeball, then yeah, I guess you could just vent the whole neck of the red tail and leave the bridge out there dangling. That seems awkward. The only other amusing detail about this particular design of ship is that the FTL game appears to only use either square rooms or rectangular rooms, not, say, L-shaped rooms. This results in the weird things that you see going on here with, say, the sensor room, the cloaking room, the hacking room, and the drone control room, the little room with the little face-looking thing with the antenna on top of it. You got a ring there, and then you've got a ring on the port side, and then you have a massive ring around the entire stern of the ship. In fact, there's like 7 or 8 variations of a loop you could do around the stern of the ship. I guess if you need to do exercise and get your miles in or something while you're jogging around the ship, you've got all kinds of variations of different paths you could take, right? And speaking of loops or rings or circuits or however you want to call it, we might as well jump ahead to the Engi cruiser, and specifically its layout A, aptly named the Taurus. Guess what shape it comes in? Well, you'd technically topologically be correct. It's a donut. But it's a really weird, vaguely geometric donut, which makes a certain degree of sense. The Engi are a species of kind of like congealed nanites, which probably explains why the Engi medbot dispenser exists on this ship. Yes, you do not have to go to the medbay anymore. The medbay comes to you because the atmosphere of the Engi ships are saturated with nanites that will heal you on the fly. Yeah, I cannot imagine that inhaling heavy metals is good for most organics, but I'm sure the Engi don't worry about that particular detail themselves. Regardless, since this is an alien ship of many, it of course threw, symmetry right out the window. This is a pretty standard trope among science fiction, everything. Almost always human ships are symmetrical. And to highlight aliens being aliens, frequently their ships are asymmetrical. Just because it bugs something in your little brains about the way things should be or something like that. This one kind of leans into it. It also leans into the Engis being, robots sort of kind of themselves, and you lose a weapons installation, but you gain, really good drones. Like right off the bat, you start with drones. And now in this game, I should specify that the actual energy style weapons, say the ion blast or the laser guns or so on and so forth, don't actually require ammunition. They do take energy from your reactor, and that's a whole separate thing of how to balance that problem. But then you also have missile launchers, which require, naturally, missiles. And then you have drone controllers, which naturally require drone parts to assemble drones. Sadly, in the base level ships, when you expend a drone to go and fight the other ship, or to protect your ship, or to run around and repair inside of your ship, once you jump to the next system or the next sector, that drone is lost. They're gone. They somehow do not have a smart enough brain on board their little tiny bodies to crawl back on board the ship or back in their little containers or however you want to phrase it, and they just go poof. Now, there are some upgrades that make this a little less painful, but it is kind of annoying. Regardless, this is why on the Taurus, the upper left room, the drone control room, is not grayed out. It is that solid gray color because, it comes built in already. Now, amusingly, despite the Engi being, congealed nanites, they do appear to require atmosphere themselves. So we are back to once again using proper airlocks. There's one on the bow of the ship leading to the teleporter room, and another on the port side of the ship leading to the hacking room. And they're actual proper airlocks with even big doors at that. Now, they're very inconvenient to, say, the weapons room or the engineering space especially. God forbid they have to repair something in the engine room. Now, amusingly, the complexities of accessing certain spaces from the outside of the ship kind of got solved in the most hilarious way possible in Layout Charlie C for the Engi cruiser, otherwise named the Tetragon. In this case, the battery backup room, the mind control room, the teleporting room, and the drone control room all have direct access to space, because they all have doors out. And then there's one airlock, again, on the way to the bridge and the door control room, the thing that are 2 vertical bars stuck together. That's the door control system. The sensor thing is directly above that particular airlock. And that's the only actual airlock on the ship. Everything else is directly accessing engineering spaces on the ship. Now, I have no idea why the drone control room has a door into the hole in the donut. Can you imagine the docking assembly necessary to thread through that donut and then hook up to that door? Or maybe this is just the exterior maintenance of the hatch that allows the crew to go out and do the needful whenever it needs to be done, and it's not that big of a deal. Still looks kind of weird on the design, doesn't it? But regardless, there is your initial crash course into the, easiest ship to get in FTL, the Kestrel, and some other natural ones that you may discover along your method of playing the game. And yeah, you earn the additional ships by doing certain things through the course of the game. Each one is a different thing, and you unlock them as you go, basically. And if you would like to see your inimitable dockmaster struggle busing through FTL Multiverse, which adds a whole pile of new features to the game, well, tune in next Friday, and we'll see what we can do, right? And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the docks for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.